I just don't understand why you waste your time with that construction job when you could be doing something with your life. My name is Joshua, and those words came from my dad during what was supposed to be a nice family dinner in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm 29 years old, work as a project manager for Ironwood Forge Construction, and I'd been paying his medical bills for 6 years without him knowing it. The conversation happened at my aunt's house on a Sunday evening in March. My dad, Vincent, sat at the head of the table, cutting into his roast beef like he was dissecting my entire existence. My cousin Miranda was there with her phone, always recording family moments for her social media. I thought nothing of it at the time. Joshua was doing fine, Dad, my sister Bethany said, trying to deflect the conversation. She knew how these dinners went. Dad would find something to criticize about my choices, my career, my life decisions. It was his favorite hobby. Fine. Dad laughed, but there was no warmth in it. He's almost 30 and he's still swinging hammers for a living. When I was his age, I had already started my accounting practice. I kept eating, kept my mouth shut. I'd learned years ago that arguing with him only made things worse. What he didn't know was that every month I transferred $2,400 from my savings account to cover his cardiac medication costs. His insurance covered some of it, but the co-pays and specialty drugs were expensive. I'd been handling it since his first heart attack when I was 23. Construction pays well, I said quietly, not looking up from my plate. Does it pay well enough to support a family, to buy a house, to build something lasting? His voice carried that familiar edge of disappointment. Or are you just going to keep living in that apartment, working with your hands like some kind of laborer? Miranda giggled at something on her phone. My Aunt Helen tried to change the subject to her neighbor's new garden, but Dad wasn't finished. I just worry about you, son. I see your cousins getting married, starting families, building careers that matter. And then there's you. The words hit different that night. Maybe it was because I'd just gotten a promotion to senior project manager. Maybe it was because I'd been thinking about asking Jennifer out on a real date instead of just grabbing coffee after work. Or maybe it was because I'd spent my lunch break that very day scheduling Dad's next cardiology appointment and making sure his prescription refills were set up properly. I finished my dinner in silence while Dad continued his lecture about responsibility and ambition. What I didn't know was that Miranda had recorded the whole thing and she was about to change everything. Dad had his first heart attack 6 years ago, right after my 23rd birthday. I was fresh out of college, working my first real job with Ironwood Forge, learning the business from the ground up. The medical bills started arriving immediately. His insurance covered the hospital stay and basic medications, but the specialized cardiac drugs and frequent specialist visits created a mountain of co-pays. Mom had passed away from cancer 3 years before that, leaving Dad to handle everything alone. My sister Bethany was in nursing school in Oklahoma City, drowning in student loans. My brother Trevor was stationed overseas with the Army. That left me. I never asked if Dad needed help with the bills. I just started paying them. I'd call the pharmacy directly, put my credit card on file for his prescriptions. I'd receive the cardiology bills in the mail because I'd changed the billing address to my apartment. Dad assumed his insurance covered everything. He never asked questions, never saw the statements. The money came from everywhere I could find it. I worked overtime on weekends, took on side projects, lived in a cheap apartment instead of buying a house. While my friends were taking vacations and buying new cars, I was making sure my dad's heart medication stayed current. $2,400 every month like clockwork. Dad owned a small accounting firm downtown. He built it from nothing, and he was proud of that. Maybe that's why he couldn't understand my choice to work in construction. In his mind, I was throwing away my business degree to play in the dirt with power tools. What he didn't see was the satisfaction I found in building something real. Watching a foundation pour, seeing walls go up, knowing that families would live in the houses we built. Ironwood Forge specialized in residential construction and we had a reputation for quality work. I'd started as an assistant project manager and worked my way up. My boss, Jacob, had been hinting at partnership opportunities, but Dad only saw the dirt under my fingernails and the work boots by my door. The warning signs had been there for months. Dad's comments were getting sharper, more frequent. Family gatherings became opportunities for him to list my shortcomings. Bethany mentioned that he'd been asking her questions about my finances, wondering how I afforded my apartment on a construction worker's salary. Miranda had always been the family peacekeeper, the one who tried to smooth over Dad's rough edges. She was 26, worked as a marketing coordinator, and had a way of deflecting tension with humor or distraction. I trusted her. She'd grown up more like a sister than a cousin since her mom Helen and my mom were best friends. That trust was about to pay off in ways I never expected. The text message from Miranda came 3 days after the dinner. Just a simple "call me when you get a chance." Important. I was on a job site in Broken Arrow reviewing electrical plans with our foreman when my phone buzzed. I called her back during my lunch break, sitting in my truck with the windows down and the Oklahoma heat pressing in around me. "I need to show you something," she said without preamble. "Can you come by my apartment after work?" Her voice had an edge I wasn't used to hearing. Miranda was usually light-hearted, quick to laugh. This was different. I drove to her place in Midtown Tulsa, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and high ceilings. She answered the door with her laptop already open, her face serious. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to her couch. I recorded Sunday dinner. I was making a video for Instagram. Just family stuff, you know. But I caught something you need to hear. She clicked play on a video file. I could see the dinner table, hear the familiar voices of our family, then Dad's voice, clear as day. "I just don't understand how anyone can be such a hopeless loser at 29 years old. Joshua is going nowhere fast and he's too stubborn to admit it." The words that followed were worse. Dad talked about how I was wasting my life. How I'd never amount to anything. How he was embarrassed to tell people what his son did for work. He called me useless and said I was a disappointment to the family name. I'd been at the table. I'd heard some of it, but hearing it played back, recorded with that casual cruelty in his voice, hit different. This wasn't frustration or concern. This was contempt. "There's more," Miranda said quietly. She fast-forwarded to another section where Dad was talking to Uncle Robert about family finances. "At least my medical bills aren't a burden on anyone. Insurance covers everything." I sat back on her couch and felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. "How long have you been paying his bills?" Miranda asked. 6 years. She closed the laptop and looked at me with something like fury in her eyes. "Joshua, that's not right. What he said about you, what he thinks about your life, and you've been supporting him this whole time." I drove home in silence, thinking about $2,400 a month for 72 months. Thinking about the vacations I hadn't taken, the house I hadn't bought, the life I'd put on hold, thinking about Dad sitting at that dinner table, calling me a hopeless loser while I paid for the medication that kept his heart beating. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew what I had to do. I didn't make any sudden moves. That wasn't my style, and it wouldn't accomplish what I needed to accomplish. Instead, I spent the next week documenting everything. Bank statements, pharmacy receipts, cardiology bills, insurance, explanations of benefits, 6 years of financial records that told a story Dad had no idea existed. The monthly automatic payment to Brookshire Pharmacy was scheduled for the 15th of every month. His cardiology appointment co-pays went through on whatever day he had his visits, usually the third Wednesday. The specialized medication co-pays hit my credit card twice a month, regular as clockwork. I called Jennifer on Thursday evening. She was a structural engineer who worked with Ironwood Forge on our larger projects. We'd been grabbing coffee after work sites for months, dancing around something that felt like it could be more than friendship. "Want to grab dinner instead of coffee tomorrow?" I asked. Actual dinner with plates and everything, the whole experience. We went to a steakhouse in downtown Tulsa. Over dinner, I told her about the recording, about the medical bills, about the decision I was making. I needed to say it out loud to someone who wasn't family, someone who could tell me if I was being reasonable or just vindictive. "So, you've been paying for his heart medication for 6 years, and he has no idea?" Jennifer asked. "None. He thinks insurance covers everything. And he called you a hopeless loser, among other things." Jennifer put down her fork and looked at me across the table. Joshua, that's financial abuse. Maybe not intentional, but that's what it is. You've been supporting him while he tears you down. That weekend, I made the calls. First to Brookshire Pharmacy to remove my credit card from Dad's account. Then to Drive Williams' cardiology office to update the billing information back to Dad's address. Finally, to my bank to cancel the automatic transfers. The pharmacy technician, Brenda, had been handling Dad's prescriptions for years. She knew my voice. Are you sure about this, Joshua? Your dad's medications are pretty expensive without the payment assistance. I'm sure. Please remove all my payment information from his account effective immediately. What should I tell him when he comes in for his next refill? Tell him to contact his insurance company. The hardest call was to Dr. Williams's office. His nurse, Patricia, had been copying me on Dad's test results and appointment summaries for years, thinking I was helping coordinate his care. Mr. Bennett, is everything okay with your father's treatment plan? Everything's fine with his treatment. I just won't be involved in the financial aspects anymore. Please update his billing address to his home address and remove my contact information from his file. There was a pause. Does your father know about this change? He will soon. I spent Sunday afternoon writing a letter. Not an angry letter, not a vindictive letter, just facts. A clear explanation of what had been happening for 6 years and why it was ending. The letter was 2 pages long. I detailed every monthly payment, every copay, every prescription cost. I included copies of bank statements and pharmacy receipts. I explained that his insurance covered roughly 60% of his cardiac care costs and that I'd been covering the remaining 40% without his knowledge. At the end, I wrote, I hope you understand that I can no longer provide this financial support while being described as a hopeless loser who will never amount to anything. I wish you well with your healthcare moving forward. I signed it, sealed it in an envelope, and drove to his house that evening. Dad was watching television in his living room, the same recliner where he'd recovered from his heart attack 6 years earlier. I handed him the envelope. What's this? Some information you should have. He opened it right there, read the first page, then the second. I watched his face change as he processed the numbers, the dates, the reality of what I'd been doing. Joshua, I had no idea. I know. Why didn't you tell me? Because you never asked. Dad called me the next morning at 6 a.m. before I'd even left for the job site. We need to talk. I think the letter covered everything. Joshua, please come over before work. I drove to his house, still in my work clothes. Dad was waiting on his front porch with coffee and a stack of papers. His face looked older than it had 3 days earlier. I went through my medical files last night, he said. All of them from the beginning. He spread the papers across the porch table. Insurance statements, pharmacy receipts, billing notices. Most of them had my name or my address somewhere in the documentation. I found this in my filing cabinet, he said, holding up a letter from his insurance company. It was dated 4 years earlier, explaining that his cardiac medications had exceeded his annual prescription benefit limit and that he would be responsible for co-pays moving forward. I never opened it. I sat down across from him and waited. There are dozens of these letters, bills, notices, explanations of benefits. I just assumed everything was handled automatically. He looked up at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. How much money are we talking about total? I'd done the math Sunday night after writing the letter. About $173,000. The number hit him like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair and stared out at his front yard where Mom's roses were starting to bloom. $173,000 give or take, and I called you a hopeless loser. You did? Dad was quiet for a long time. Then he started talking, and what came out surprised me. Your mother handled all the medical bills when she was sick. All the insurance calls, all the paperwork, all the fighting with the companies. When she died, I just couldn't face it anymore. I threw the medical mail in a box and hoped it would sort itself out. He pulled out another paper, this one from his bank. I've been wondering for years how my checking account stayed so stable. I thought maybe my accountant was handling something automatically or the insurance was better than I realized. The truth was simpler and more painful than either of us had expected. Dad hadn't been deliberately taking advantage of me. He'd been burying his head in the sand about anything medical-related since Mom's death. Too traumatized by the memory of fighting insurance companies during her cancer treatment. "I owe you an apology," he said. "And I owe you money." "You don't owe me money." "Yes, I do. $1,173,000, Dad." "You don't have that kind of money." "Then I'll figure out how to get it." He was serious. I could see it in his face. The same stubborn determination that had built his accounting practice from nothing. But I could also see something else. The weight of realizing that his hopeless loser son had been carrying his financial burden for 6 years while he criticized every choice I made. "There's something else," I said. "Miranda has recordings of other family dinners. Apparently, this wasn't the first time you've talked about me like that." Dad's face went gray. "What did I say?" "Does it matter? The point is, you've been saying it, Joshua." "I never meant yes, you did. You meant every word." I went to work that morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My boss, Jacob, found me reviewing blueprints for our newest residential project, a 15-house development in South Tulsa. "You look different today," he said. "Feel different." "Good different or bad different?" "Just different." I told him about the conversation with Dad, about the 6 years of medical payments, about the decision to stop. Jacob listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. "So, what now?" he asked when I finished. "Now I figure out what to do with an extra $2,400 a month." Jacob smiled. "I might have some ideas about that." We talked for an hour about the partnership opportunity he'd mentioned before. Ironwood Forge was expanding, taking on commercial projects in addition to residential. They needed someone to manage the new division, someone with a business degree and construction experience, someone like me. "The partnership buy-in is usually around $200,000, Jacob said. "But we could structure it as sweat equity plus monthly payments over 3 years. $2,400 a month for 3 years was $86,400. I had the money I'd been saving for a house down payment, and the partnership was within reach. That evening, I opened a new investment account and set up automatic transfers. The same amount that had been going to Dad's medical bills would now go toward my own future. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jennifer and I had dinner again on Wednesday, this time at her apartment where she cooked, and I told her about the partnership opportunity. "So, you're going from paying for your dad's heart medication to buying into a construction company." "Looks that way." "How does that feel?" "Like I'm finally making decisions for myself instead of just reacting to everyone else's needs." My phone rang while we were cleaning dishes. Dad's name on the screen. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me. "About the recordings, about the things I've said. I want to make this right." "How?" "I'm calling a family meeting. Sunday dinner at Helen's house again. Everyone who was there last week." "Dad, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. And I want you to bring that recording." Sunday came faster than I expected. The same dining room, the same people, but everything felt different. Dad had asked Helen to set up her laptop to record the conversation. Miranda sat across from me with her phone ready to play the original recording. "Before we eat," Dad said, standing at the head of the table, "I need to say something to everyone here, especially to Joshua." He told them everything, the medical bills, the money, the 6 years of support I'd provided without his knowledge. He played Miranda's recording of his comments about me being a hopeless loser. Then he said something I'd never heard from him before. I was wrong. Not just about the money, though. That's part of it. I was wrong about Joshua's choices, about his work, about his life. I let my own fears and disappointments turn into criticism of a son who has been more responsible and caring than I ever gave him credit for. The room was quiet. Bethany was crying. Uncle Robert was staring at his plate. Miranda was recording everything. "I don't know how to repay him," Dad continued. "I don't know how to make up for 6 years of taking his support for granted while tearing him down, but I'm going to try." Dad's first medical bill without my support arrived on the 23rd of the month. $2,418. He called me that evening. The pharmacy says my insurance doesn't cover the full cost of my medications anymore. It never did. But I thought, you thought wrong. The bills kept coming. Cardiology copays, prescription costs, specialist fees. Everything I'd been quietly handling for 6 years, suddenly became Dad's responsibility. His checking account, which had seemed mysteriously stable for so long, started dropping fast. By the end of the first month, Dad owed over $4,000 in medical expenses. He called Bethany, asking if she could help with the costs. Then Trevor, who was now stationed in Germany. Then Uncle Robert. I don't understand. Bethany told him during one of these calls. I thought your insurance covered everything. So did I. Miranda, who had been quietly sharing the family dinner recordings with our cousins, finally played them the audio of Dad calling me a hopeless loser while I'd been paying his bills. The family group chat went silent for 3 days. When Trevor called Dad from Germany, he was direct. You called Joshua a hopeless loser while he was paying for your heart medication. I didn't know he was paying for anything. That's not the point, Dad. The point is how you talked about him. Dr. Williams' office called me in early May asking if there had been a mistake with the billing changes. Dad had missed 2 cardiology appointments because he couldn't afford the copays. No mistake, I told Patricia. Please coordinate his care directly with him moving forward. 3 weeks later, Dad sold his house. Dad moved into a smaller place, a townhouse near downtown Tulsa that cost half what his old mortgage had been. The equity from the house sale covered his outstanding medical bills and created a fund for future expenses. I signed the partnership agreement with Ironwood Forge in June. Jacob and I celebrated with beer and barbecue at a restaurant overlooking the Arkansas River. Jennifer was there along with our project foreman and his wife. It felt good to celebrate something that was entirely mine. To Joshua, Jacob said, raising his beer. Partner, friend, and the hardest working man I know. Dad started calling me once a week, usually on Sunday evenings. Not to ask for money or help, just to talk about work, about his new townhouse, about small things that didn't carry the weight of disappointment or criticism. I'm proud of you, he said during one of these calls in late summer. The partnership, the business you're building. I should have said that years ago. You should have. I know. Miranda showed me another recording from a recent family dinner. This one was Dad talking to Uncle Robert about my construction company, about the commercial projects we were taking on, about how smart and capable his son was. His voice carried the same pride he used to reserve for other people's children. Bethany graduated nursing school and got a job at St. Francis Hospital. Trevor was promoted to sergeant. Our family dinners became smaller, quieter affairs where people talked about their own lives instead of criticizing each other's choices. I kept the extra $2,400 a month flowing into investments and business growth. By Christmas, my savings account looked better than it had in 6 years. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well enough that you don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. In the months that followed, Dad's harsh words eventually caught up with him in ways beyond the financial burden. Word spread through his professional network about how he had unknowingly criticized the son, who had been supporting him for years. Several longtime clients quietly took their business elsewhere, uncomfortable with his lack of awareness about his own family dynamics. His accounting practice, which had been his source of pride, began to struggle as his reputation for family responsibility came into question. Meanwhile, I found peace in knowing that sometimes the strongest response to betrayal is simply stepping back and letting people face the natural consequences of their choices.